What if the person who spent years convincing you that you were nothing was the same person forced to watch you become everything he could never stop? 3 years ago, if someone had told me that I would one day stand in a room filled with executives, investors, and reporters while my ex-husband sat frozen in silence, unable to take his eyes off me, I would have laughed through my tears. Back then, I believed every cruel word Jason Whitmore ever said. I believed I was too emotional, too weak, too ordinary. For 12 years, he reminded me of my place. At dinner parties, he corrected me before I could finish a sentence. In front of friends, he turned my mistakes into jokes. In private, he made me feel like every success in our marriage belonged to him and every failure belonged to me. The worst part wasn't that he humiliated me. The worst part was that eventually, I started humiliating myself. I stopped dreaming. I stopped speaking up. I stopped recognizing the woman staring back at me in the mirror. Then came the night that shattered whatever was left of my confidence. Standing in front of dozens of people, Jason raised a glass and delivered a joke that left the room laughing and left me wishing I could disappear. What happened next destroyed my marriage, my sense of identity, and the life I thought I would have forever. Within months, I lost my husband, my home, my friends, and nearly my belief that I deserved a future at all. Jason thought that was the end of my story. He thought I would spend the rest of my life proving him right. What he didn't know was that rock bottom can become a foundation. What he didn't know was that every insult he threw at me would eventually become fuel. And what he definitely didn't know was that the woman he called replaceable was about to build a life so extraordinary that one day he would stand only a few feet away from her and realize he had lost the best thing that ever happened to him. But before that moment arrived, before the success, before the headlines, before the regret that would haunt him, there was a broken woman sitting alone in a tiny apartment wondering how she was supposed to survive another day. And that is where this story begins. The apartment smelled faintly of old coffee and fresh paint, a combination Claire Whitmore never imagined she would associate with freedom. It was barely 600 square feet, tucked above a small bookstore on a quiet street outside downtown Chicago, but it was the first place she had ever lived that felt entirely hers. No designer furniture chosen to impress clients. No carefully staged rooms that looked more like magazine photographs than a home. No constant pressure to make everything appear perfect. Just a worn couch, a tiny dining table near the window, and a silence that still felt unfamiliar. Some mornings, Claire woke up and forgot that she was divorced. For a few brief seconds, she would reach across the bed expecting to find someone beside her. Then reality would settle in like cold winter air slipping through a cracked window. Jason was gone. The marriage was gone. The future she had spent 12 years building was gone. She sat at the kitchen table and stared at the stack of unpaid bills spread in front of her. The numbers seemed almost unreal. During her marriage, she had never worried about money. Jason handled everything. At least that was what he always said. He handled the finances. He handled the investments. He handled the decisions. Looking back, Claire realized that what he really handled was control. She wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Her phone remained silent. No messages. No calls. No invitations. It was strange how quickly people disappeared after a divorce. Friends she had known for years suddenly stopped checking in. Couples they used to spend weekends with chose Jason's side without ever asking what had happened. The loneliness was not dramatic. It was quiet. That made it hurt even more. Her eyes drifted toward a framed photograph sitting on a nearby shelf. It showed a younger version of herself standing beside Jason on a beach in California. The sun was setting behind them. Both were smiling. Looking at it now felt like staring at two strangers. There had been a time when Jason made her feel special. A time when he listened to her ideas. A time when he encouraged her dreams. But those memories had become harder and harder to find beneath years of criticism disguised as advice. He used to tell her she was lucky to have him. At first it sounded romantic. Later it sounded like a warning. Claire picked up the photograph and studied her own face. The woman in the picture looked hopeful, confident, alive. Somewhere along the way, she had disappeared. A notification suddenly appeared on her phone screen. Her stomach tightened. The message was from a former friend named Melissa. For a brief second, Claire hoped it might be an apology. Instead, it was a social media link. Curious despite herself, she opened it. The page loaded instantly. There was Jason, standing in front of a luxury hotel downtown, his arm wrapped around a tall blonde woman with a flawless smile. Beneath the photograph was a caption that read, "Sometimes life rewards you when you finally stop settling." Hundreds of comments filled the page. "Congratulations. Beautiful couple. You deserve happiness." Claire felt the air leave her lungs. She read the caption again, then again. It was not the new relationship that hurt most. It was the message hidden beneath it. Jason wanted people to know he believed his life had improved after leaving her. He wanted the world to compare the two women and decide who had won. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Part of her wanted to close the app and forget it existed. Instead, she scrolled through more photographs. Expensive restaurants, weekend trips, smiling faces, perfect lighting, perfect lives. By the time she finally locked the phone, tears blurred her vision. She hated herself for caring. She hated that his opinion still carried weight. Most of all, she hated that somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe he had been right about her all along. Maybe she really was ordinary. Maybe she really was not enough. The thought stayed with her the rest of the day. It followed her to the grocery store, where she carefully counted every dollar before reaching the checkout line. It followed her during her evening job search as another rejection email arrived in her inbox. It followed her into bed that night as she stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Around midnight, she finally gave up and walked to the window. Chicago's skyline glowed in the distance. Thousands of lights stretched across the darkness. Somewhere out there, people were building companies, chasing dreams, creating futures. Claire wondered when she had stopped believing she could do the same. Her reflection stared back from the glass. Tired eyes, slumped shoulders. A woman trying desperately to hold herself together. Yet something unexpected happened as she stood there. For the first time in months, she felt anger. Not the explosive kind. Not revenge. Something quieter. Something stronger. The realization that she had spent years allowing another person's opinion to become her identity. Jason had left, but his voice still lived inside her head. Every criticism, every insult, every reminder that she was not good enough. She suddenly understood that if she wanted her life back, she would have to silence that voice. The next morning, Claire woke up before sunrise. She sat at the same kitchen table, opened a notebook, and wrote a simple question at the top of the page. Who was I before I started believing him? She stared at the words for a long time. Then she began writing answers. She remembered the ambitious college student who loved marketing and business strategy. She remembered the young woman who dreamed of owning her own company one day. She remembered someone who had once believed failure was part of growth instead of proof of worthlessness. By the time the sun rose over the city, several pages were filled. It was not a business plan. It was not a miracle. But it was the first step she had taken for herself in years. What Claire did not know was that a single decision she would make later that week was about to place her on a path that neither she nor Jason could have imagined. The decision seemed insignificant at first. Claire almost ignored the email when it arrived 3 days later. She had spent most of the week applying for jobs, updating her resume, and trying not to think about Jason's increasingly public relationship. Every social media platform seemed determined to place his smiling face directly in front of her. The subject line of the email read, "Community Business Development Workshop." Normally, she would have deleted it immediately. She was exhausted, discouraged, and struggling to imagine how a free weekend seminar could change anything. But something about that question she had written in her notebook continued to linger in her mind. Who was I before I started believing him? So on Saturday morning, Claire found herself driving 20 minutes through light traffic toward a small conference center on the edge of the city. The room was far from impressive. Folding chairs filled the space. Coffee sat in large silver containers near the entrance. Most of the attendees looked ordinary. Small business owners, freelancers, people trying to rebuild careers or start new chapters. For the first 15 minutes, Claire felt completely out of place. Then the speaker walked onto the stage. His name was Ethan Carter. Claire had never heard of him before, but apparently everyone else had. Conversations immediately stopped. Phones appeared. People whispered excitedly. Curious, Claire searched his name online. Her eyes widened. Ethan Carter had built one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the Midwest. Several major publications had featured him. He was respected throughout the business community. Yet he spoke with none of the arrogance Claire had come to associate with success. Instead, he opened with a simple question. How many of you are here because your confidence disappeared before your talent did? Nearly every hand in the room slowly rose, including Claire's. Ethan smiled. Good, he said, because confidence can be rebuilt. Talent is much harder to replace. Something about those words settled deeply inside her. Throughout the day, Ethan spoke less about business strategies and more about mindset. He discussed how people gradually accept limitations placed on them by others, how criticism repeated often enough begins to sound like truth, how success rarely starts with opportunity. It starts with identity. Claire filled page after page in her notebook. For the first time in years, she felt awake. During a break, she stood near the coffee station reviewing her notes when someone spoke beside her. You write faster than anyone I have seen all morning. She looked up. Ethan Carter stood there holding a paper cup. Claire immediately felt embarrassed. I guess I am trying not to miss anything. Ethan glanced at her notebook. Most people listen for information. You seem to be listening for transformation. The comment caught her off guard. They spoke for only a few minutes, but by the time the conversation ended, Ethan had asked several questions nobody else had bothered asking in years. What had she studied in college? What work excited her? What goals had she abandoned? The answers felt uncomfortable. Every response seemed to reveal another dream she had quietly buried. Before leaving, Ethan handed her a business card. You have good instincts, he said. Do not waste them convincing yourself otherwise. Claire drove home feeling lighter than she had in months. Unfortunately, reality was waiting. The following Monday, she received another rejection email. Then another. Then another. By the end of the week, 7 companies had declined to hire her. Each rejection chipped away at the fragile confidence she had begun rebuilding. The old voice returned. The one that sounded suspiciously like Jason. Maybe you are not qualified. Maybe you are not capable. Maybe everyone else sees what he saw. One evening, while sorting through bills, her phone rang unexpectedly. The caller ID displayed Melissa's name. Claire hesitated before answering. Hello. Claire, I thought you should know something. Melissa sounded uncomfortable. Know what? A pause followed. Jason is engaged. Claire closed her eyes. For a moment she said nothing. I see. The announcement is everywhere. I just did not want you finding out online. But Claire already knew exactly what would happen next. Photos. Congratulations. Headlines within their social circle. More reminders that he appeared to be thriving while she struggled to rebuild her life. After hanging up, she sat quietly at the kitchen table. Strangely, the news hurt less than she expected. Not because she was healed. She was not. But because something else had started growing inside her. Determination. The next morning, another email arrived. This one came from Ethan Carter's office. Claire assumed it was a marketing newsletter until she opened it. Her heart nearly stopped. Ethan was launching a mentorship initiative for professionals rebuilding careers after major life transitions. The program accepted only 10 participants. Claire read the message 3 times. Then she laughed bitterly. Someone like her would never be selected. She almost closed the email. Almost. Instead, she spent the next 4 hours completing the application. She wrote honestly about her divorce, about losing confidence, about forgetting who she was, about wanting a chance to become that person again. When she finally submitted it, she felt both relieved and foolish. The chances were probably impossible. 2 weeks passed. Life returned to its familiar routine of job searches and financial stress. Then on a rainy Thursday afternoon, her phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Ethan's assistant. Claire listened silently as the woman spoke. Then she sat down so quickly she nearly missed the chair. Out of more than 600 applicants, she had been selected. Claire stared out the window after the call ended. Rain streaked across the glass exactly as it had the night she first moved into the apartment. Everything around her looked the same. The tiny kitchen, the stack of bills, the uncertainty. Yet for the first time since her marriage ended, she could feel a door opening. What she did not realize was that while she was preparing to rebuild her future, Jason was about to make a decision that would drag her back into his world in the most humiliating way possible. For the first few weeks after joining the mentorship program, Claire felt as though she were learning how to walk again. Every Tuesday evening, the group gathered in a modern office building overlooking the Chicago River. The sessions were intense. Participants analyzed business cases, practiced presentations, and challenged assumptions that had limited them for years. Ethan Carter had a way of asking questions that made excuses impossible. Whenever someone explained why they could not do something, he calmly asked what evidence supported that belief. Most of the time, there was none. Claire quickly discovered that many of her limitations existed only because she had accepted them for so long. One evening, Ethan assigned a simple exercise. Each participant had to stand before the group and describe a future version of themselves 5 years from now. Claire listened as others confidently discussed growing companies, launching products, and reaching ambitious goals. When her turn arrived, she froze. Every eye in the room focused on her. The old anxiety returned immediately. Her heart raced. Her palms felt damp. For a moment, she considered sitting back down. Then she remembered something Ethan had said during the first session. Confidence is not what comes before action. It is what comes after repeated action. Taking a deep breath, Claire stood. Her voice shook at first, then gradually became steadier. She described building a consulting agency that helped small businesses improve customer engagement and marketing strategies. She described financial independence. She described waking up excited about work instead of afraid of failure. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Then people began applauding. Claire sat down feeling embarrassed and strangely emotional. It was the first time in years she had spoken about her future without apologizing for it. Unfortunately, progress rarely moves in a straight line. 3 days later, she received an invitation that threatened to undo everything. The envelope arrived in the mail on a Friday afternoon. Elegant, expensive, addressed in perfect handwriting. Claire recognized the return address instantly. Her stomach tightened before she even opened it. Jason and his fiancée were hosting an engagement celebration at one of the city's most exclusive hotels. The invitation was not personal. Hundreds of people would attend. Business associates, friends, community leaders. Yet her name had somehow made the guest list. Claire stared at the card for several minutes. At first, she assumed it was a mistake. Then she remembered Jason. Nothing involving image or appearances was ever accidental. A few hours later, her phone confirmed her suspicion. A message arrived from one of their former mutual friends. Hope you can make it. Jason said it would be nice for everyone to see that you were doing okay. Claire nearly laughed. The message sounded polite, generous even, but she understood exactly what it meant. Jason wanted witnesses. He wanted people to compare their lives. He wanted to demonstrate how completely he had moved on. That evening she called Melissa. Should I go? Claire asked. Melissa hesitated. Honestly, I would not. Why? Another pause. Because most of the people there still see Jason as the success story. The words lingered after the call ended. Success story. It was the same narrative Claire had heard ever since the divorce. Jason thriving. Claire surviving. Jason advancing. Claire recovering. The next Tuesday, Ethan noticed her distraction immediately. After the session ended, he invited her into a conference room overlooking the city lights. Something is bothering you, he said. Claire explained the invitation. The engagement party. The pressure, the humiliation she anticipated. Ethan listened quietly. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. Do you know what is interesting? He asked. What? You are still viewing the situation through his eyes. Claire frowned. What do you mean? You assume attending means proving something to him. You assume not attending means losing. Either way, he remains the center of the story. Claire looked away. The realization stung because it was true. Ethan continued. The question is not whether you should go. The question is why you would go. That conversation stayed with her for days. Meanwhile, the mentorship program accelerated. Participants were challenged to develop actual business proposals. Claire spent countless hours researching local companies, studying customer behavior trends, and building strategies. To her surprise, she excelled. The skills she had once doubted were still there. Buried perhaps. Forgotten. But not gone. During one workshop, Ethan reviewed her project and smiled. You realize this could become a real business, right? Claire stared at him. You really think so? I do not think so, he replied. I know so. It was a simple statement. Yet hearing someone express confidence in her abilities felt almost overwhelming. For years, encouragement had been conditional. Fragile. Rare. Now someone respected her work because it deserved respect. Not because of who she was married to. Not because of appearances. Because of merit. Weeks later, an unexpected breakthrough arrived. One of the small businesses participating in the mentorship network agreed to implement Claire's customer engagement strategy. The project was modest. The payment was modest. But it was her first paying client. Claire celebrated by buying takeout from a neighborhood restaurant and eating dinner on her apartment balcony despite the chilly weather. The city lights seemed brighter that night. The future felt closer. Yet even as progress accumulated, the date of the engagement party approached. Every time she checked her calendar, anxiety returned. Eventually the night arrived. Claire stood alone in her apartment staring at the invitation one final time. She could stay home. No one would blame her. No one would expect otherwise. But deep down, she knew something had changed. Months earlier, attending would have been an act of desperation, a need to prove she still mattered. Now it felt different. She picked up her coat, locked the apartment door behind her, and headed toward the hotel. What awaited her inside would become one of the most painful nights of her life. And it would also become the moment that finally changed everything. The ballroom looked exactly the way Claire expected it would. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Servers moved gracefully through the crowd, carrying silver trays filled with appetizers and champagne. Laughter echoed across the room. Expensive suits, designer dresses, perfect smiles. It was the same world she had once belonged to. Yet standing near the entrance now felt strangely different. For a moment, old memories flooded back. Years of events just like this. Years of standing quietly beside Jason while he worked the room. Years of introducing herself as someone's wife instead of her own person. She almost turned around and left. Then she caught her reflection in a nearby mirror. The woman staring back looked nervous, but she did not look defeated. That realization gave her enough courage to step forward. At first, the evening went better than expected. Several former acquaintances greeted her politely. A few even seemed genuinely pleased to see her. Claire allowed herself to relax. Perhaps she had worried for nothing. Then she saw Jason. He stood near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by guests. His fiancée remained beside him, smiling for photographs. The crowd seemed drawn toward them like planets orbiting a sun. For a brief second, Jason's eyes met hers across the room. Surprise flashed across his face. Then came something else. Satisfaction. As though her presence confirmed exactly what he had hoped. 10 minutes later, Claire learned why. She was speaking with a local business owner she had met through the mentorship program when Jason approached. His smile appeared friendly. Charming. Perfectly practiced. Claire, he said loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. I am glad you came. She returned a polite smile. Congratulations on the engagement. Thank you. Jason glanced around at the small group gathering nearby. I was actually just telling everyone how resilient you have been. Claire immediately recognized the tone. On the surface, it sounded complimentary. Underneath, it carried something else entirely. Jason continued. Starting over cannot be easy after everything. The conversation around them grew quieter. More people began listening. I appreciate your concern, Claire replied carefully. Jason laughed. Concern? Come on. We were together for 12 years. I still care what happens to you. Several guests nodded sympathetically. Claire felt trapped. Every word had been designed to position him as generous and compassionate. Any disagreement would make her appear bitter. Jason took a sip of his drink before delivering the line she would remember for years. Honestly, I am proud of you for hanging in there. Not everyone is built for the kind of success we were chasing. Sometimes a simpler life is the right fit. A few people chuckled softly. Others looked uncomfortable. Claire felt heat rise into her face. There it was. The humiliation hidden beneath politeness. The assumption that she had failed while he had succeeded. The suggestion that her ambitions had always been too small to matter. For a moment, the old version of Claire almost returned. The version that apologized. The version that shrank. The version that questioned her own worth. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of responding, she simply smiled. You may be right about one thing, she said calmly. Jason raised an eyebrow. What is that? Success looks very different to me now. The room fell silent. Jason seemed unsure how to answer. Before he could recover, another guest interrupted the conversation. The moment passed, yet the damage lingered. Throughout the rest of the evening, Claire overheard fragments of conversations. Comments about how difficult divorce must have been for her. Assumptions that she was still struggling. Questions phrased as sympathy but rooted in judgment. By the time she finally left the hotel, the pain felt almost unbearable. The cold Chicago air hit her face as she stepped outside. She walked several blocks before stopping near the river. City lights reflected across the dark water. Tears threatened to form, but she refused to let them. Not this time. She replayed every word Jason had spoken, every subtle insult, every carefully disguised attempt to establish superiority. Then she realized something important. Jason had not changed. Not at all. The difference was that she finally saw him clearly. For years, she believed his criticism reflected reality. Tonight proved otherwise. He needed her to remain small, because her growth challenged the story he told himself. The realization felt like a key turning inside a locked door. The next morning, Claire woke up with a level of determination she had never experienced before. She stopped treating her consulting work like a temporary experiment. She treated it like a business. Every spare hour went into building systems, developing services, studying markets, and reaching potential clients. Weeks became months. The first client referred another, then another. Revenue remained modest, but momentum grew. More importantly, confidence grew with it. Ethan noticed the change immediately. During one mentorship session, he reviewed her latest results and smiled. "You are not asking for permission anymore." Claire laughed. "I did not realize I was. Most people do not." Then he handed her a folder. Inside was information about a regional entrepreneurship competition sponsored by several major companies. The winner would receive funding, mentorship, and media exposure. Claire stared at the application requirements. Hundreds of applicants. Industry experts judging every proposal. The odds seemed impossible. Ethan leaned forward. "You should apply. There is no way I could win." Ethan smiled. "That answer tells me exactly why you need to." Later that evening, Claire sat alone in her apartment reviewing the documents. Fear returned immediately. The competition was bigger than anything she had attempted. The possibility of failure felt enormous. Yet beneath the fear was something else. Excitement. For the first time, she was standing in front of an opportunity that belonged entirely to her. No husband, no safety net, no one else's reputation, just her abilities. As she completed the application, she had no idea that this decision would eventually place her on a stage where thousands of people would learn her name. Nor did she know that one of those people would be Jason. The application process consumed nearly every free moment of Claire's life for the next 6 weeks. During the day, she worked with clients, refining marketing strategies and customer engagement plans. At night, she prepared for the entrepreneurship competition. Research reports covered her dining table. Financial projections filled pages of notebooks. More than once, she fell asleep with her laptop still open beside her. The work was exhausting, but it felt different from the exhaustion she had experienced after her divorce. Back then, she had been surviving. Now she was building. The competition itself attracted hundreds of entrepreneurs from across the Midwest. Technology founders, retail innovators, consultants, product developers. Every participant seemed accomplished and confident. On the morning of the preliminary presentations, Claire sat in a crowded conference center, holding a cup of coffee she was too nervous to drink. Looking around the room, she immediately questioned whether she belonged there. Many contestants already owned successful companies. Some had teams of employees. Others had investors. Claire still operated from a small apartment with a second-hand desk. The old doubts began creeping back. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan appeared on the screen. "Remember, the room is not deciding your value. They are evaluating your idea." Claire read the sentence 3 times. Somehow it helped. When her turn finally arrived, she walked onto the stage and faced the judges. Bright lights illuminated the room. Dozens of competitors watched from the audience. Her heart pounded. For a brief moment, she forgot the opening line of her presentation. Then she took a breath and began speaking. Within minutes, something shifted. The anxiety faded. The years she had spent helping Jason prepare business pitches, reviewing marketing campaigns, and analyzing customer trends suddenly became assets rather than forgotten memories. Every skill she believed had been wasted was still there. Every lesson remained. The presentation flowed naturally. Questions from the judges became opportunities instead of threats. By the time she finished, several judges were taking notes. Claire left the stage feeling something she had not felt in years. Pride. 2 days later, an email arrived announcing the finalists. Claire opened it while sitting at her kitchen table. She expected disappointment. Instead, she nearly dropped her phone. Her name appeared among the top 10 finalists. She read the message again to make sure she had not imagined it. Top 10. Out of hundreds of applicants. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Not because she had won. She had not. But because for the first time, objective strangers had evaluated her work and determined it belonged among the best. Nobody could take that away. The final event would take place 3 months later. During that time, finalists would receive additional coaching and public exposure. Local business publications began featuring contestant profiles. Industry newsletters highlighted their companies. Slowly, Claire's professional network expanded. New clients arrived. Revenue increased. Opportunities multiplied. Meanwhile, life continued moving forward for Jason as well. Through mutual acquaintances, Claire occasionally heard updates. His engagement plans were becoming more elaborate. His company was pursuing a major expansion project. On the surface, everything appeared perfect. Claire rarely thought about him anymore. At least that was what she told herself. Then one afternoon, nearly a year after the engagement party, she received an unexpected call. The voice belonged to a reporter from a regional business magazine. Claire Whitmore. Yes, we are publishing a feature on emerging entrepreneurs. Several judges from the competition recommended you. Would you be willing to participate in an interview? Claire sat silently for several seconds. Opportunities like this happen to other people, not her. Yet over the following weeks, the interview took place. A professional photographer visited her office. The article was published online and quickly gained attention within local business circles. New inquiries flooded her inbox. Potential clients scheduled meetings. Partnerships emerged. Her company experienced more growth in 2 months than it had during the previous year combined. One Friday morning, Claire arrived at her office to find her assistant waiting with an excited expression. You need to see this. She handed Claire a tablet displaying an announcement from the entrepreneurship competition. The finalists had been invited to present during a major business summit attended by investors, executives, and media organizations from across the country. The event would be held in Chicago. Thousands of attendees were expected. Claire's pulse quickened as she read the details. Then her eyes landed on the sponsor list. One company name immediately stood out. Whitmore Development Group. Jason's company. For several moments, she simply stared at the screen. The odds felt impossible. Yet there it was in black and white. After all the months of rebuilding, after all the effort, after all the distance she had created, their worlds were about to collide again. Later that evening, Claire sat alone in her office long after everyone else had gone home. The city skyline glowed outside the windows. She thought about the woman who had stood humiliated at the engagement party. The woman who doubted herself every day. That version of her felt increasingly distant. Not gone, but transformed. Her phone suddenly vibrated. Another email had arrived. The subject line read, "Congratulations, finalist." Inside was the event schedule. Claire scanned the agenda until one particular name stopped her cold. Jason Whitmore, featured keynote speaker. Their appearances were scheduled on the same day. Claire leaned back in her chair and stared out at the city lights. Somewhere across Chicago, Jason was probably preparing for the summit as well. He likely expected another routine speaking engagement. Another opportunity to reinforce his reputation. What he did not know was that the woman he once dismissed as incapable was about to walk onto the same stage. And this time, she would not be standing in anyone's shadow. The morning of the summit arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp Chicago air that made the city feel full of possibility. Claire stood in front of the mirror inside her hotel room, adjusting the sleeve of her navy blazer. 3 years earlier, she would have been terrified. Today, she felt something different. Not confidence exactly. Something steadier. She no longer needed the audience to validate her. She no longer needed success to prove her worth. The journey itself had already changed her. Everything else was simply a bonus. The convention center buzzed with energy. Thousands of attendees filled the massive building. Investors, founders, executives, journalists, and entrepreneurs moved through the halls carrying coffee cups and conference badges. Large digital screens displayed schedules and speaker information. Claire checked in and headed toward the green room reserved for presenters. As she entered, conversations echoed throughout the space. Several finalists reviewed notes. Others practiced speeches. Then she saw him. Jason stood across the room speaking with 2 executives. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. His expression shifted from casual recognition to complete disbelief. Claire almost laughed at the look on his face. It was not anger. It was confusion. The kind of confusion that appears when reality refuses to match expectation. Jason excused himself from the conversation and walked toward her. Claire. His voice sounded uncertain. I did not know you were speaking today. Apparently neither did I a year ago, she replied with a polite smile. He looked her over as though trying to solve a puzzle. I have been hearing things. Claire raised an eyebrow. Things? Your company. The articles. The competition. For a moment, he seemed to search for the right words. You have done well. Years earlier those words would have meant everything. Now they felt strangely empty. Thank you. Jason nodded slowly. Maybe we could catch up after the event. Claire simply smiled. We will see. Before he could continue, an event coordinator entered and announced that speakers needed to prepare. The conversation ended. Yet as Claire walked toward the stage area, she could feel Jason watching her leave. An hour later, the keynote session began. Jason delivered his presentation first. As expected, it was polished and professional. The audience responded positively. Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Everything appeared normal. But Claire noticed something subtle. Several times during his speech, Jason seemed distracted. His focus drifted. His energy felt different. Then it was her turn. The auditorium contained nearly 2,000 people. Bright lights illuminated the stage. Giant screens displayed her name behind her. Claire stepped forward and looked across the audience. For one brief second, she remembered the woman standing in that hotel ballroom years ago, feeling small and powerless. Then she began speaking. She shared lessons learned from rebuilding after personal and professional setbacks. She explained how small businesses often underestimated the value of authentic customer relationships. She discussed resilience, adaptation, and growth. Most importantly, she spoke honestly. There was no performance, no attempt to impress, just truth. The audience listened intently. People took notes. Heads nodded throughout the room. When she finished, the applause lasted longer than she expected. During the question and answer session, several investors approached the microphones. One wanted to discuss partnerships. Another asked about expanding her services nationally. A third requested a private meeting after the conference. Claire answered each question calmly. As she left the stage, dozens of attendees gathered near the exit hoping to introduce themselves. The next several hours passed in a blur. Business cards exchanged hands. Meetings were scheduled. Journalists requested interviews. Opportunities appeared faster than she could process them. Then came the awards ceremony that evening. Finalists gathered near the front of the ballroom, while attendees filled hundreds of tables. Large screens displayed highlights from the competition. Claire sat quietly beside Ethan Carter. No matter what happens, Ethan said, remember where you started. She smiled. I will never forget. The host stepped onto the stage and began announcing category winners. One by one, names were called. Applause echoed throughout the room. Finally, only the top award remained. The room grew silent. Claire felt her pulse quicken. She genuinely had no idea what to expect. The host opened an envelope. This year's Entrepreneurial Impact Award goes to. A pause followed. Claire Whitmore. For a second, she thought she had misheard. Then the audience erupted. Ethan laughed beside her. People stood. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Claire covered her mouth in disbelief. As she walked toward the stage, she glanced across the room and saw Jason sitting completely still. The expression on his face was impossible to forget. Not jealousy, not anger, realization. The realization that everything he believed about her had been wrong. Standing beneath the lights, holding the award, Claire listened as the host described her achievements. Revenue growth, client success stories, community impact, future expansion plans. Every accomplishment represented work she had done herself. No shortcuts, no rescue, no miracle, just persistence. When the microphone was handed to her, the room fell quiet again. Claire looked across the audience. Hundreds of faces stared back. Somewhere among them sat the man who once convinced her she would never be enough. She smiled softly and began speaking. A few years ago, I believed other people knew my potential better than I did. I spent far too much time accepting limitations that did not belong to me. If there is one thing I have learned, it is this. The opinions that nearly break you do not have to define you. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do is trust yourself after someone else convinced you not to. But if you keep going, if you keep growing, eventually you stop asking for permission to become who you were always capable of being. The audience rose to its feet. Applause filled the room once again. And somewhere in that standing ovation, Jason finally understood that the woman he once underestimated had become someone he could never control, diminish, or define again. The summit changed everything, but not in the way Claire once imagined. Years earlier, she thought success would feel like a dramatic finish line. She believed there would be a single moment when every wound disappeared, every insecurity vanished, and every painful memory lost its power. Instead, success felt surprisingly quiet. The Monday after the conference, she arrived at her office just like any other day. The coffee machine still made the same strange noise. Her inbox was still overflowing. Client meetings still filled her calendar. The difference was not in the world around her. The difference was inside her. For the first time in years, she trusted herself completely. Over the following months, her company continued growing. New partnerships expanded her reach beyond Illinois. She hired additional employees. Larger organizations sought her expertise. Articles about her work appeared in business publications across the country. Yet the achievement she valued most had nothing to do with revenue or recognition. It was the simple fact that she no longer woke up questioning her worth. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after the summit, Claire was reviewing proposals when her assistant appeared in the doorway. "There is someone here to see you." Claire looked up from her computer. "Do they have an appointment?" "No." Her assistant hesitated. "But I think you know him." Claire followed her toward the reception area. The moment she turned the corner, she saw Jason standing near the front desk. He looked older than she remembered. Not physically, emotionally. The effortless confidence he once carried seemed diminished somehow. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Claire smiled politely. "Jason, thank you for seeing me." She nodded toward a nearby conference room. Once inside, silence settled between them. Jason looked around at the office. The employees. The awards displayed on shelves. The framed articles on the walls. Evidence of a life she had built without him. "You have created something incredible," he said quietly. Claire thanked him. Another silence followed. Then Jason took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology." Claire remained calm. "For what?" He laughed softly. "Honestly, where should I start?" He looked down at the table before continuing. "For making you doubt yourself. For acting like your ideas did not matter. For convincing myself that your value depended on me." The words seemed difficult for him to say. Claire listened without interruption. "Back then," Jason continued, "I thought confidence came from being the smartest person in the room. I thought success meant winning every comparison." He shook his head. "I was wrong." Claire studied him carefully. For the first time, she saw not the man who had controlled every conversation, but someone confronting the consequences of his own choices. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" Jason asked. "What?" "Watching you succeed and realizing you always had this inside you. None of it came from me." Claire smiled gently. "No, it did not." Jason nodded. His eyes reflected genuine regret. "I spent years believing I was the reason things worked. The truth is, you were carrying more than I ever acknowledged." They spoke for nearly an hour. Not about getting back together. Not about the past in obsessive detail. Just two people finally seeing their shared history clearly. Before leaving, Jason paused near the door. "There is one thing I never understood." Claire waited. "How did you stop being angry?" She thought about the question carefully. Years ago, she would have answered differently. Now the response came easily. "Because eventually, I realized my future was more important than my resentment." Jason nodded slowly. "That sounds like something I should have learned a long time ago." After he left, Claire stood by the office window overlooking the city. The conversation had not reopened old wounds. It had closed them. She felt no desire for revenge. No need to prove anything further. The apology did not change the past. It simply confirmed what she already knew. His opinion no longer determined her reality. Months later, on a warm summer evening, Claire attended a charity event benefiting young entrepreneurs. As she walked through the venue, several students approached to thank her for mentoring them. One young woman lingered after the others left. "Can I ask you something?" she said nervously. "Of course." "How did you become so confident?" Claire smiled. It was the same question people asked her all the time. The same question she once struggled to answer. She glanced toward the city skyline glowing in the distance. "I did not become confident first," she said. "I became willing first. Willing to fail. Willing to learn. Willing to keep going even when I doubted myself." The young woman listened carefully. Claire continued. "Most people think confidence creates action. In reality, action creates confidence. The student thanked her and walked away. Claire remained standing there for a moment, watching the lights sparkle across the city. Years earlier, she had stood alone in a tiny apartment wondering whether she would ever feel whole again. She thought losing her marriage had destroyed her future. What she did not understand then was that some endings create space for a better beginning. The woman who once measured her value through someone else's approval was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and far more free. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not the award, not the recognition, not the successful company. The greatest victory was discovering that her worth had never depended on another person's opinion. It had been there all along, waiting for her to finally believe it.